Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Pandemic Lens seminar today. We're really delighted to be part of the Play Creators Conference, albeit a very different format this year. My name is Joanna Feeley and I am the founder and creative director at Trend Bible, and I'm here today to share our pandemic lens with you, which helps you understand the way that the pandemic has impacted the future of play. Okay, so we at Trend Bible focus on everything to do with home, really, everything to do with life at home. And our job is to understand the future of life at home for consumers all over the world. And that takes us into many different sectors, really, from the future of play and education through to entertainment and even food and sleep, just to name a few. So we get to see how the future unfolds in a number of different industries, and we get to see some of that cross-pollination from one industry to the next. And today I'm going to share with you our pandemic lens forecast, and you'll be able to see some of the trends that we think have accelerated as a direct consequence of the pandemic. And also I'll spotlight some weak signals that we've found that identify future opportunities for those of you working in the field of play, and these should hopefully be something you can add to your armoury to allow you to stay relevant and resilient, really, in the face of some of these unprecedented changes. And typically we would work as trend forecasters around 2 to 3 years in the future, sometimes as far as 5 years out, actually. And I just wanted to show you this slide because these are just some of the hashtags that have been shared over the past few months on Instagram, and these are hashtags that behind each of these hashtags represents thousands of images that got shared alongside this hashtag, and these are things that didn't exist. This is all phraseology that didn't exist a few months ago. So what we're finding is that change is happening at a much quicker pace than we've known it to happen for years, and that we must stay alert to all of these new behaviours that are starting to emerge. We would typically describe the pandemic as a black swan event. A black swan event, usually in trend forecasting terms, is it's described as an unpredictable event, really, but with global implications. And whilst as a trend forecaster, we didn't see this pandemic coming, I'm sure if you spoke to epidemiologists, they would have told you that in their field of work, this is absolutely something that they saw coming. So we would describe it as a black swan event. Not everybody does, because some people do think that it was predictable, but just some stats here to really sort of hammer home the extremes of what we're facing now with the consequences of the pandemic. A third of the US population are in lockdown. 22 million people in the US lost their jobs in the 4 weeks to April the 11th. A 70% increase in the use of the Facebook app since January 2020. And a contraction of 30% of the global fashion industry is set for 2020. And those are current statistics, but even the data and the stats are changing all the time. So it's just to give you an idea, really, of the sort of dramatic backdrop that we sit inside when we're thinking about the future of play and the future of family life and what's going to impact parents, children, and those people that buy toys and games. The nature of change in itself is something that's also altering, and we look at two different types of consumer behaviour here. On the left-hand side, you'll see the image that reflects these kind of elastic behaviours, so behaviours that maybe were pre-pandemic behaviours, where people have pinged back in an elastic fashion to things that they did before. They've just gone back to doing things that they did before. And then on the right-hand side, we see this guy working from home. This is what we would describe as an accelerated trend. So it was something that some people were doing and some very directional, forward-thinking companies were looking to do, which was to allow their workforce to have more flexibility and to spend more time working from home. But of course, that's been accelerated and has been adopted much more broadly as a result of the pandemic. And this reminds me of that phrase that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. That's absolutely the case with something like working from home. Some companies were already on the case trying to make this an acceptable way for people to blend their work life. And now, of course, we're seeing this accelerated, and those very forward-thinking companies are at the forefront, really. We're looking to them for some of the answers that they were already starting to investigate. So our 2020 trends, we forecast those actually back in 2018. So as I said, we work about 2 years ahead. And we've been back and looked at those trends. We've obviously put a pandemic lens over those trends to ensure that they remain relevant. And what we noticed was there were a handful of trends that actually just their importance was accelerated and deepened. And also some of the trends we'd forecast for 2021 had been accelerated. And so we've brought those into this presentation today because we feel that we'd call those horizon trends really, but we feel they're accelerated to the point that you could start to act upon them now. So applying the pandemic lens to our forecast, we'll take a deep dive into how brands, retailers, inventors, toy designers, and also those in the licensing community can respond to 3 of the trends that we've got today. And we've picked these because they give us a really nice broad range of understanding family life, and also adults who buy games and adults who buy toys, as well as children and family life as well. And the 3 trends that we're going to look at today are exploring emotion, social hub, and conscious choices. So the first one is exploring emotion. This was a trend that was originally forecast for 2021, specifically for the kids industry. And the reason that we were looking at this was because we had some research that suggested that things like 24-hour news culture and exposure to social media, gaming addiction, and hype culture was having this negative effect on childhood mental health. And actually, granted, those things still do have roots in this trend, but what we noticed was the crisis mode and the uncertainty that was brought about as a result of the pandemic has also added a kind of stress to this mental health crisis that we were starting to see. It's worth mentioning, though, that this is not just limited to children, and this idea of exploring and being able to explore emotion will resonate across a number of different generations. So within this story, I've got 3 examples to show you what this trend looks like in practice, and they are normalising emotion, finding calm, and play it out. So the first one, we've just got a couple of case studies here really to show you how normalising emotion is starting to come through as a trend for 2020. Parents will be navigating difficult conversations as the pandemic continues to unfold, and they are trying to help their children cope with very complex emotions, fear, anxiety, loneliness, and grief, and even just confusion. And we've seen governments, organisations, and brands have a sort of a duty really to respond to answering the questions of children. And actually, even in Norway, we saw a couple of months ago that the Prime Minister there, Erna Solberg, had held a press conference, especially for children, to ease their fears and explain what was going on. So what we're starting to see is maybe, macro influences, lifestyle indicators that maybe once parents could opt out of explaining to their children, now we're seeing children really heavily exposed to some of the consequences of the pandemic, whether that's talking about the infection rate and the consequences of that, or whether it's talking about other topics that would have been considered adult topics previously, unemployment and finances and things like that. We've got one example here from Mattel, from the Barbie brand, and we've got Barbie's vlog, which encourages kids to talk about their feelings whilst they're staying at home. And speaking directly to her audience, Barbie normalizes those feelings of overwhelm, upset, and frustration. So we're seeing brands, retailers, parents, caregivers encourage children to think about all of the feelings they have and all of the emotions that they experience, rather than just focusing on positive emotions and positive experiences. So I think this is really interesting for the toys and game industry. How might we take something like this and think about how it could inform the way that we play games? And what if games weren't always about solving things and feeling happy? And what if they address some of those emotions that actually are deemed to be more negative. So there's some food for thought there for all of the inventors that we have in our audience typically at these events. The second micro theme that we have in Exploring Emotion is called Finding Calm. With the home accommodating life, work and play, parents have been attempting to introduce a sense of routine and carve out pockets of downtime. And parents or not, I think we can all agree that that is something that's been something that we've been seeking out. So recognising the need to support children in processing and regulating their emotional responses has seen brands respond with products to encourage mindful and meditative practices. And we've got a couple of examples here. We've got the CBeebies Mindful Garden, which is the image on the left here. This is designed for under fives. It's an app and it allows children to focus and find calm, and obviously is a digital engagement, but very much focused around this idea of mindfulness. And then on the right hand side here, we have Jamie Amore's Cosmic Kids Yoga. This is the #1 kids yoga app, and it's a story-centered approach to yoga. So we're starting to see some of these. We've been talking about things like yoga for kids for probably about 5 or 6 years in trend terms. But actually what's really interesting about lockdown is that there's been a real uptake in the technological versions of some of this stuff. So it's not necessarily that people have started taking their kids to a yoga class on a Saturday morning, but given the opportunity and the time to do this at home, people have leaned really heavily on technology as a facilitator for some of these behaviors that previously were, their attitudes had probably shifted. Their attitudes as parents had probably suggested that this is the kind of thing they wanted to do. But actually now we're seeing the behavior shift. And as trend forecasters, that's always our job, is to look at what kind of attitudes do parents and children have? And are they able to live out those attitudes? Are they able to be true to what they want to do? Are we able to facilitate them through play, through games, through technology to do what they want to do? And I think that the pandemic has been really useful for seeing some of these behaviours actually come through very strongly. And we have a quote here from one of our Trend Bible researchers, and she said, to care for the well-being of their children, we're seeing an uptick in new family rituals like daily yoga. Slowing down is more important than ever to create spaces of calm for downtime where children feel comforted and can reflect. And the image on the right-hand side there is a trend story called New Rhythms that we forecast for spring-summer 2020. And you can see there, just from the visuals and the kind of quietness of the palette, very sort of soft palette. This is a palette that is applicable for nursery, home interiors, toys, games. And if you want to have a look at some of our spring summer 20 trends, they're over on our blog. You can actually download those and have a look at some of the colour palettes and the visuals there that go with this. The third micro story within this section is called Play It Out. And sometimes kids do just want to be kids. And the gaming industry has been pivotal during the pandemic. This is really about finding, that need for escape has been very strong, and the world of gaming has provided that. And we have 2 examples here. We have the Minecraft Blockdown Simulator on the left-hand side. So this is a kind of zombie-themed game where children get to take on the role of hospital nurse or an observer and can choose between various different scenarios, from lockdown to free-for-all and quarantine. So really interesting that we're starting to see these realities, I guess, mimicked through gaming so quickly. And the other example on the right-hand side is Animal Crossing, which obviously has seen a huge rise in sales over lockdown. And this is really just this idea, that phrase really stood out to me about low stakes domesticity, just the really simple stuff in life is a very welcome distraction. And that's the same motivator that has adults gardening and growing things from scratch. This kind of connection to the basics and to providing very basic provisions is something that, whether it's engaged with digitally or in real life, has really started to shine through during the pandemic as people engage with simpler activities. So what does it mean? What's the forecast? What do we expect to happen next? Well, beyond the pandemic, even that as a phrase is quite high risk to say beyond the pandemic. But I guess what I mean by that is that we will find ways to live with the pandemic, whether or not we have the ability to to access a vaccine or not, we don't know, but we will have a phase where we live with the illness and live alongside it, and then we will have a phase with an unprecedented, we don't know what that time frame is going to be yet, but we know that having a vaccine is absolutely critical to people getting back to a majority of the behaviours they had before the pandemic existed. So we expect these practices to continue and become commonplace in caring for our holistic well-being. Encouraging open conversations and introducing mindful practices early on will be seen as preparation for adulthood in managing life's challenges. So this is really big for any of you designing games and toys for children. So we've put a couple of ideas here, just a few thought starters really to get you to a position where you can start to innovate from this information. So help children share what they are feeling, explore family journals, role-playing characters, and crafts that centre around facial expression. So as I mentioned before, it's about a range of expressions, a range of emotions, not just limited to happy emotions. Support kids in articulating how they really feel by expanding their vocabulary and comprehension, and gamify learning through things like stories and songs. Our third idea is for toys and games. Embed features and processes into your products that encourage families to slow down, reflect, and open up to one another. And lastly, design products and games that will bring comfort, instill calm, and promote memories of happier times. And really, I guess that could be personal memories of happier times, or there could be collective kind of historical memories of happier times. And we expect that that will start to trigger, as it often does when we have these downturns, whether it's a recession or whether it's a pandemic. Quite often as humans, we want to go back and remember times that we're happier. So we do still think that there's a role here for nostalgic design. And obviously, those of you in the world of gaming will know that things like jigsaw puzzles and some of those classics like Monopoly have been so popular. And so that kind of nostalgia for very simple games we think will continue to be important. So the second story, the second of three stories I've got to share with you today, is called Social Hub. So before COVID-19 hit, the homebody economy, as we call it, was already growing significantly. And for two generations in particular, the millennials and the Gen Z, they prefer to socialise in the comfort of their own homes. And they've been brought up in a world of home delivery for their favourite restaurants, food. This is all about, even sort of the Airbnb culture is all about going away but feeling at home. So the home for these two generations is really, really critical. And this year the home has become the centre of our universe and is more on show than ever before, because people do share imagery and pictures of their homes. And of course, so many more people are sitting in Zoom calls, as you will be now, and sharing the backgrounds and their surroundings of their homes. So our homes are, even though we don't necessarily invite people into them, they're seen and they're kind of shown off more than ever before. So this will drive householders to recreate social experiences at home, expressing their personality and their tastes through their homewares and their interiors. So we're seeing this real shift in status from what was traditionally owned really by fashion and cars. This idea of status would be expressed through those objects and those things that could be seen out in public. We're now seeing this real shift in status to be about sharing things that are within our homes. So the first of the three micro trends I've got to talk to you about today within this, the first one is embracing maximalism. And we work a lot in the world of decor and home interiors, as well as the world of family life, because we look at everything that happens inside of the home. And I wonder if any of you have started to notice this creep of strong, bold colour and even 1980s design that's starting to come back. We're starting to see, coloured kitchen units. Not everybody has the white gloss kitchen that people had in the sort of early 2000s. People are starting to pick, pink kitchen cupboards, and even the coloured bathroom suite is making a comeback. People want colour in the very permanent items of their home, and I think these two images really reflect that. So we're starting to see this place for self-expression, for bolder colour choices, And it's fair to say that decorators and consumers are far more sophisticated with the way they put colours together than ever before, because they have such inspiration on social media platforms. They're able to sort of take a photograph from Instagram and go away and product match or even shop from that image to buy their own things and recreate those looks at home. So we're starting to see this idea of sort of personal taste in a way that was previously only expressed through fashion and cars and fashion accessories. So expect to see more colour, more clashing colours, more sophisticated use of colours together. Expect to see mixes of prints and patterns together and eclectic furniture and accessories. And really think about, if you're designing particularly things like board games that aren't always easily stored away, think about the context in which they will now be sitting. They're sitting in these very highly stylized homes, and we work a lot in the world of baby and kids, and even things like babies' pushchairs. People are starting to make space within the home so that those tools and items that they don't want to be seen will be hidden away, and so that they can maintain this very highly decorated scene at all times. The second theme I wanted to talk to you about within this story is the importance of connection. So we work a bit in the world of gifting and greetings cards and just basically anything that involves celebrating at home. And this is a segment that has really been thriving during lockdown. And this kind of everyday gift or everyday send, this kind of just because gifting has really boomed as we've started to see the consumers realize the importance of those relationships and friendships that they've been so removed from. And we start to see more emotional literacy really as a society. And you can see the top image there. This is a company where you can send a hug. So it's just a really interesting concept that, you know, maybe 12 months ago we were talking about the fact that the greetings card industry was, you know, really struggling. And now we're talking about people actually sending a hug as a paper illustration. So things are really shifting and changing at quite a pace. And then the bottom image there, the art of celebration. Money that might once have been spent on socialising in bars and restaurants will be reallocated for in-home celebrations. So expect to see elaborate home celebrations and curated, personalised gifting. And again, I would just urge you to think about the role of play and engagement, and how, if you're designing things like games, how you might start to promote this idea of relationship and shared values, I guess, as well. What's been really interesting to observe during lockdown has been this idea of friendships and shared values, and actually where we disagree with each other as well. So being able to find your tribe, whether that's your family or your friendship groups, or maybe even just an online group that you're involved with, has become really, really important. It's made us appreciate the people that we have something in common with. And you'll see this reflected even through things like the Black Lives Matter campaign and some of the gender debates that have occurred during lockdown. People really keen to start to find people that they can connect with that genuinely reflect their own beliefs and their own principles around the way that they think society should operate, and even around health and controlling the virus. We've all seen that people have taken their own way to interpret what safe means for them, and that's also caused us to see that there are different approaches, and that people that maybe we really know quite well have an approach that is really quite different from our own. So there's a lot of stuff to dig into there, and to think about how that might translate into the world of toys and games and connection. The third and final story in this section is quarantine and chill. So during the first official week of the coronavirus, sales of board games in the UK and jigsaw puzzles soared by 240%. So this has largely been as a result of families looking for screen-free distractions and looking for ways to connect with one another to pass the time. And of course, as we fast forward, we've then seen tech products start to rocket as families design this kind of the ultimate tech center, whether that's from a gaming perspective or maybe a video conferencing zone, and also attempt to recreate things like a home cinema experience. So we've seen that shift from kind of analog through to digital technology. And we've got two examples here The one at the top there is the Lego Land Rover Defender. Lego has seen a huge rise in some of these sets that are what we would consider to be evidence of adults taking time to build and play in their newfound spare time and finding ways to do those kind of flow activities, I guess, things that can take your mind off the realities of the day and start to get you to engage almost in a way that craft gets you to engage with hobbies that take you away. They're kind of escapist activities. And then we've got a quote here from Frederic Toot, who's the global toy market expert for NPD. And he said, "It's interesting to see the classic games of Monopoly, Scrabble, Cluedo, and Uno on the list. These standards have shown us over and again that they can stand the test of time when reinvented. And so it looks like they'll continue entertaining generations of Britons as householders look to release stress and tighten family ties during these challenging times." And I just thought that was such a brilliant phrase. You know, if you are releasing stress or tightening family ties through the games that you're inventing, those are really it's a really valuable phrase that I think you could sort of innovate just from that phrase alone. So what does the forecast look like? What do we think will now happen? We expect to see a greater investment in the home as a social venue. So consumers will be more willing to invest in state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment, for example, and things like projectors, music systems, anything that enables them to get a really high quality experience at home, really. And reunited with loved ones, again, we expect things like board game nights to continue. They might not be the heart and soul of the way that people will spend their time now that they can get back into restaurants and bars at the moment in most areas. But I think we have to consider that we know that the way that we would sort of encourage you to think about the implications of the pandemic are that it will probably happen in waves. And so we might see people's behaviours flip back into kind of lockdown behaviours, I guess, as different pockets of the country start to get locked down and then come back out. So we have to assume that if the pandemic works in waves, then some of the behaviours will work in waves as well. So what can we do about this? Tap into the move towards a maximalist aesthetic. So I mentioned to you about this idea of bold colour and this huge expression that's happening with home decor. Can we be creating products that make a bold visual statement? What is the role of your game? Does it have to blend into the background to be something that can be hidden away? Or is it something actually that has beautiful packaging that people would feel nostalgic about and they want to have it on display as part of their decor? Favouring staycations, dining al fresco will look to recreate a holiday vibe and present opportunities for outdoor products, furnishings and activities. As we've seen, this kind of outdoor cinema theme is something that's been building momentum during lockdown. So have a think about other activities and other games really that could link in with this idea of either staycations or recreating that holiday feeling whilst at home. And I've just taken that phrase really from the previous page, from that quote about, you know, release stress and tighten family ties. I think those are two really, really key things that toys and games can do at the moment. And with play seen as a stress reliever, look out for new kidulting opportunities as well. We use this phrase kidulting all the time, so I'm sure you're familiar with it, but this idea of adults wanting to behave more like kids and wanting to play was something that was still considered quite niche. And we've spoken to a lot of toy brands who've sort of not paid it an awful lot of attention. But of course, as a result of the pandemic, we're seeing even the world of crafting just reach such high sales volumes and be so important for householders and consumers that actually this whole concept of kidulting has really been put under the microscope again. So people are paying extra special attention, particularly to millennials. They seem to be predominantly the demographic that are interested in this world of play and games, even as adults, and even obviously without having their own children. And the third and final trend I wanted to talk to you about today is called conscious choices. So financial unease and anxiety will unite householders as the pandemic continues to shake markets and put jobs at risk. And this will push consumers into recessional behaviours. And the thing that specifically pushes consumers into recessional behaviours, yes, it's money, but more often than not, it's fear. So even if people feel that their finances haven't really been impacted. As with the 2008 financial crash, not that many people could claim that their finances had actually been impacted in those early sort of 18 months of that crisis hitting, but the fear was there sufficiently that it affected their behaviours, and that was really what started to impact a broader range of markets. So customers will be more frugal, but will increasingly look for each purchase to align with their values at no extra expense to themselves. So this is really about, it's about ethics in a broad context, but it's about the role of environmentalism specifically. So we have 3 micro trends to show how this works in practice, and they are ethics-based shopping, sustainability, conflicts, and hyper-essentialism. I'll just talk you through these 3 slides. So the first one is ethics-based shopping, and behaviours in early lockdown have shown how strong the trend is towards ethics-based shopping. We've seen some really good examples of this if you look at the hashtag boycott ASOS on the right-hand side here. And Gen Z particularly are focused on this idea that they will only buy from brands and retailers that reflect their values as a group. And so they will use their voice as a platform to make positive change, and they will engage in something that's been referred to as cancel culture. They will just cancel their relationships with brands if they feel that those brands do not reflect and represent all of their values. And you'll have seen this so many times during lockdown and during the pandemic. So brands and retailers who knew what the right thing to do was pre-pandemic, but felt that it was risky to push the button on some of those things, now have no choice. And the only other option is that they will get called out on some of those activities, or they will risk, as I said, being cancelled. And if you look particularly at some of those really large corporates like Primark, they are wasting no time now telling their customer that they are doing the right thing by some of the textile and fashion suppliers that they lean on. And they're really making sure that people understand that they're not just there to take your money and sell you cheap goods. They do care about the people that work for them, and they care about the people that supply into them. So this really goes right through the supply chain. The other example I've got on this page is the Conscious Beauty Company. You can see the packaging there. So subscriptions have become a really important part of daily life for so many consumers, and that is across food and beauty, personal care and toys. And it can help them lead a more ethical and sustainable life, although we are starting to see some questions being raised about what this is doing from a transportation perspective. So it's just a bit of a watch out there, that just because it's a subscription doesn't mean that it's necessarily automatically brilliant for the environment. And these consumers will dig into that. They will again, really hold brands and retailers to account on their behaviours. The second theme we've got here is sustainability conflict. So people feel very conflicted about this idea of putting the environment first, and especially as we move into the back end of this year, where we're starting to expect to see a rise in unemployment, people will have different priorities, but what we think is going to happen here is that the sustainability argument will still, it will probably drop down for a short period of time in terms of a priority for consumers, but actually after that it will remain important. And we've got some lovely imagery here on the right hand side. These pictures allow us to see what the planet could look like. That's what the pandemic has taught us. This is what the planet could look like if we took radical action to address the climate change. But of course, already we have seen places like China, their air pollution is climbing back to pre-pandemic levels already, and environmental campaigners are urging governments to take measures to ensure that our global recovery has a sustainable legacy. So we will see this conflict. Consumers will feel this conflict between, especially with some of the messages that are coming through from the UK government about supporting retail as a way to get the GDP back on track. So there is a conflict there, and it's just worth bearing that in mind and considering when you're developing packaging, when you're developing games themselves. Are you sure that you could put that product in front of this audience and that they would be okay with every single element of it, from who supplies you with the materials for it, to how it's packaged, to what its end of life plan is beyond the use within that family or with that user. And the third and final micro theme we've got within this story is hyper-essentialism, if I can say it. Now aware of how much money people used to spend on items that were deemed non-essential, we've seen lots of people adding up the amount of money they would have been spending on that takeaway coffee on the way to the office, and they're really starting to think about how they spend their money and on what. And they want products, even the most basic products, to enhance their lives. So we're finding that this is where this hyper-essentialist mindset really kicks in. And many of the things that we once thought were essential were deemed kind of non-essential as we entered lockdown life. And we'll see customers turn away from some of those status symbols to embrace products that enhance their lives and just bring them very simple joy. So consumers will be looking for feel-good moments and activities. And again, I would encourage you to think about, what might a feel-good moment or activity look like? Or could you apply this concept of a continuum of feel-good moments with regards toys and games? And we have a quote here from one of our team, and Kate said, understanding the impact that large-scale consumerism has on the planet, we turn to the simple things to get us through these difficult times. It becomes increasingly important to practice gratitude and find beauty in everyday moments. And you can see on the right-hand side here, these are some images from a story that we had developed in 2018, obviously with no idea about the pandemic on the horizon line, but this was actually based on a lot of Japanese influences that came through from a look towards Japan as we were expecting the Olympics to take place there in 2020. And this was a story called Meaningful Life. And even though we'd focused on this because of the reference to Japan and because of the focus on the geography, there's so much that is still hugely relevant. We were already still looking to Japan for some answers about how we could live a more meaningful life and how we could slow down and how we could find beauty in the everyday. And it's just so interesting to see this accelerated as a result of the pandemic and people taking the opportunity to think about what choices they now have. Are they able to choose to live life differently? And what does the forecast look like for this? Ethics-based shopping will continue to be important and cannot be ignored. Shoppers will pick apart any injustice or wrongdoing and reward the brands who do good. And again, sustainability is still important. We fully expect the demand to return stronger than ever once the crisis eases. And by that, I mean, as I said before, this idea that there will be some financial implications and there will be a fear factor that will be a stronger driver for how people behave than potentially their focus on sustainability. But we do expect that will right itself again. As for consumerism, excess and opulence will be perceived as distasteful. Instead, consumers will be upgrading the things that they use often. And I think this image really exemplifies that. It's the idea of, you might have a coffee every single day, but is it the most beautiful experience of a coffee that you could possibly have? Because we're taking time to appreciate some of these really beautiful things in our lives. And we've got 3 ideas here, just thought starters. It's no longer going to be practical to produce high volumes of new products at pace. We're already starting to see some of these retailers who operate directly from Instagram, where there is a kind of demand-driven approach to design, having real success, and they're really being held up as good examples of how to shift really the model from producing and then considering demand. So it's really worth looking at some of these Instagram influencers for the way that they sell from a demand-first approach. So designers will need to regain a slower, more thoughtful design process and range plan to get this right. So we see this as really impacting the very bare bones of the design process. It will have to be examined in order that we don't produce too much waste and we only produce what's needed. Don't be tempted to abandon your sustainability initiatives and programs in the face of a blip. This is the time for innovation to prepare for the future. And what we've noticed through speaking to brands and retailers over the past year and a half is that the sustainability initiatives used to be the concern of the mainly the HR division and the corporate and social responsibility division. And now we're seeing that it's the responsibility of every single person inside an organisation. So as a designer, this has to be at the heart of your practice too. And lastly, consumers look to find happiness in the small things. How might you ensure that toys and games can be enjoyed guilt-free? What kind of guilt might people have around buying, especially new toys and games, when they know they can they're in circulation, they can be recycled? How can we eliminate this feeling of guilt around consuming new toys and games? What might you have to consider to address there? And just really to leave you with a few final thoughts. We've never before in history suggested that people don't go to work, or that entire countries stay at home, and that we all stay physically away from one another. So these, we've heard this phrase about unprecedented times, but they absolutely are. And the behaviours that we're going to start to see in the next few months, we can't model them on crises of the past, because this is very different. It's different, quite dramatically different from things like the Great Recession of 2008. Of course, there is hope that we can move forward and create a new version of normal, but we have to remember that it's both an impact on our health and our safety, as well as the economic crisis. And that's what makes it so different to the 2008 crisis, because this isn't just about money and the economy. This is actually about physical safety and being able to stem the spread of the virus as well. We're also seeing that there will be this sort of concept of rising inequality will be something that we will talk an awful lot about in the next 12 to 24 months, especially with regards to family life and especially with regards to children. So we're already starting to see things like, the people that can afford to get private tutors for their children to get them caught up whilst they've been off, and people choosing to step outside of the traditional school system to educate their children in a way that they see fit. We're starting to see a rise in that with some groups. And then at the other end of the scale, of course, we're seeing families who don't have any technology at home that children can use. And so they are hugely sidelined and disadvantaged from some of the homeschooling activities that they may have otherwise been able to take advantage of. So just watch out for this idea of rising inequality as well. We're seeing this concept of conscious deceleration, taking a conscious choice to decelerate the pace of life. It's something that we have noted that consumers have been crying out for a long time. As I said before, the attitude was there. The attitude had already shifted. We just didn't live in a world where our behaviours could be facilitated that well. And now, of course, they can. But what will people choose to do as we move out of this imposed restriction? Once they have the choice, what will they do to include this idea of a decelerated life in part of their normal routine? And lastly, this concept of a hard reset, which comes through to some of those sustainability initiatives. How might we embrace some of these more dramatic behaviours? And just that phrase, the hard reset, it's just, really reflects some of the thinking that consumers and brands and organisations are having to go through at the moment. This is it really sort of flips life on its head and gets us to think about resetting from scratch. So that brings me to the end of my presentation for today. I hope you found it useful, and we have made such a huge effort during lockdown to share as much free information as is physically possible over on our website and our blog. And we have trend updates, free trend updates that you can subscribe to over there. You can see the link on the screen there. It's trendbible.com/trend updates. You can subscribe to those. They come out every month, and we gather up all of our forecasts and push them through there. So you'll be able to find lots of free information on there, as well as visual references for some of the design trends that I've referenced through this presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and please do get in touch with me if you would like any more information.